Welcome to India, Mr. Spielberg, and thank you for being with us today. Obviously, this isn't your very first visit to India, is it?
No, I've been here several times before, but not. It's been 30 years since I've been back to India. I was here. The last time was in 1983.
Were you making films then?
Yes, Temple of Doom, and I was here on my own, backpacking through the country.
Where did you go?
But everywhere.
Really?
Yes, Benares, Calcutta, Delhi, Jodhpur, Jaipur, a lot of places. But I started here in 1977, and I shot a very small scene from my movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind in a very small town, about 3-hour drive outside of Bombay.
Oh.
And that was I was here.
Very many people know that. What was it that impressed you most about India at that point of time, when you were backpacking?
I think that people were welcoming of a foreigner, that they would invite me to eat with them. They would invite me to stay with them. They didn't know who I was. It was after I had made Jaws and after certainly Close Encounters came out. It was so great that nobody knew who I was. I remember that as being one of the happiest moments of my life. The relative anonymity of just traveling through India.
Is that something surprising for you, or is that something that isn't very prevalent in the United States of America?
No. There's no anonymity there. You know, you can be an actor in one television show that everybody watches, and that's the end of your privacy. It's over.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. Mr. Spielberg, you started off very early in your life. I believe as a child you once took an 8mm camera and made your first film with your mother being in the star cast.
Yes, I did.
What inspired you to do that?
Well, I think well, for one thing, the first time I picked up a movie camera was because I was wrecking my electric trains when I was about 12 years old. I was crashing the two trains into each other and making a complete mess, and sometimes the trains would break and my dad would have to take them back to the electric train store to get them fixed, and he told me if I ever broke my trains again, he would take the entire set away. And we had an 8mm Kodak movie camera. And I remember coming home from school one day and setting up a couple of shots, and I photographed the trains crashing. And luckily the trains didn't break, but I had it on film. I got one train going left to right, then inside the camera I stopped, I put the camera on the other train, keeping the screen direction right, the other train going right to left. And I set the camera down, shooting straight out of the track, and both trains came together and crashed. And then what I wound up doing was looking at that piece of film, 90 seconds of film, over and over and over again, and it satisfied my need for some reason to break things in those days. And in that sense, I discovered the power of cinema.
Whether it's a jewel, whether it's a shark, or an extraterrestrial being, how do you make these decisions on doing something different?
Well, I think what happens is, I don't go...
A lot of the actors actually are being threatened by this. I hope you know that.
Well, as I've aged...
The greatest remembrance that all actors are going to, think of is that the best actors is a fish, a robot, and somebody from outer space.
Yes, but as I move beyond middle age into that unspecified period of time, I've actually turned to actors to save my career. So I turned to Daniel Day-Lewis, I turned to Tom Hanks, I turned to Leonardo DiCaprio. So I have made my case with the actors to make more actor-based films. But when I was first starting out, I love big, high-concept movies. I like the idea. If the idea made me want to see the movie, then I wanted to figure out how can you write to that idea and really put it on display. So in my younger years, I did a lot of conceptual figuring out how to make a movie around a shark. And of course, I had the help of a book. Richard Matheson wrote Duel, and Peter Benchley wrote the novel Jaws. And so about 3/4 of my films all come from books. And because of that, you've already got a leg up. Half the work's already been done.
Yes. But you have switched to working with actors, and
I always work with actors, but
they just don't happen to be a fish and a robot.
Exactly.
But even in the casting process, I've noticed that they've been very unusual. Tom Hanks as a soldier, for example. Why would you have thought that?
Well, Tom's a great leader. I mean, Tom has profound leadership abilities, and it comes through in a lot of his work on the screen. Yeah, he started as a comedian. He started doing a television show, called Bosom Buddies, where he was always dressed as a woman every day. And he started, doing jokes, and he started in comedy. But there was, in every comedy actor, there is a very serious dramatic actor. You really can't do great comedy unless you have a deep dramatic core. And Tom always had that, and Tom always had a penchant for drama. And as Tom matured, his films became more serious, and Tom and I became friends. I produced 3 movies Tom was in as an actor, and we got to know each other really well. And I just thought Tom could do anything. He could be a politician, he could be the President of the United States for that matter. And so it wasn't that far of a reach to imagine Tom playing Captain John Miller.
Right. You've always apparently enjoyed the Bond movies.
I love the Bond movies.
And would you say that Indiana Jones was a kind of a inspiration from Bond films or a tribute to Bond films?
Well, not really, because when George Lucas came up with the idea of Indiana Jones, he was basing his concept on the movies that Republic Studios used to make. These serialized adventures that would show in between a double feature back in the 1940s and early 50s. You'd have a feature, then you'd have a bunch of cartoons, then you'd have a newsreel, and then they would show a kind of 14-minute segment of a movie with a cliffhanger at the end of it. And they do 15 or 16 of these little interstitials. And by the end of it, you saw an entire movie, each one having a thrilling cliffhanger. So the Indiana Jones concept was based on the old serials from those black and white American serial days.
Ever thought of directing a Bond film?
I tried to direct a Bond film, and Cubby Broccoli wouldn't hire me. I went to Cubby, and I called him up on the phone, and I just said, I had done a couple of movies. I had just started out. I had actually done Jaws, and it was a big hit, and I thought, well, that'll convince him that I can direct a Bond picture. And I got him on the telephone, and I said, I really would love to do your next Bond picture. And he said, you're not experienced enough. And he said, if we ever do one on the water, I'll call you. And so that was the end of that. And then a number of years later, after Close Encounters came out, in Close Encounters, there's a 5-note sequence that the aliens send to us, and then we send those 5 notes back to the aliens. So Cubby was making Moonraker, and he wanted to use the 5-note sequence as a parody on Close Encounters in the Bond film. But he needed my permission. Thank God for the Directors Guild of America. They really protect us. They really do. So he called me, got me at the office, and he asked if he could use those 5 notes. And I immediately said yes, and then I said, do you have a slot open? I've made 2 huge hits, Jaws and Close Encounters. I got nominated for Oscars on both films. And he said, did you win? I said, no. He said, well, no. No, not this time. Later, I'm making a movie in 1986. I was the second unit director, and I produced a movie which I wrote the story. Dick Donner was the director. It was called The Goonies. Mm-hmm. And in the film, a kid who loved the James Bond films plays the James Bond theme on a little ghetto blaster he's wearing around his neck, across his chest. But I needed the rights to the Bond theme. And I had given Cubby Broccoli the rights to my 5 notes, so I called Cubby on the phone. I said, I'm making this little picture. There's a really nice homage to James Bond. This kid comes flying in on a bungee cord, and he lands in this room, and he's playing the James Bond theme. And can I get the rights? And Cubby said, no. And I said, Cubby, I gave you free of charge the 5 notes from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He said, the Bond theme is 7 notes. But he eventually finally gave me that. So that was my consolation prize. He would never hire me to do Bond, no matter how successful my career. He would never let me in the front door, but I got the notes for free.
Yeah. But, Mr. Spielberg, you've been a producer, director, an executive producer. How do you decide which particular project of yours you're going to executive produce? And have there been occasions sometimes when you felt that, much like Cubby did, that a particular film or a story was not worth putting your name to it and withdrawn from?
I don't think I have. I think once I make a commitment to either produce or direct, I pretty much keep that promise to myself. And in the sense of producing, I have a kind of obligation to the production company that I promised to, work on the film. So I'm pretty much, what makes me decide to direct for me is still a big unknown mystery. I still can't really tell you why something like Amistad, a clearly non-commercial movie, would grab me so passionately and would keep me interested for 2 years until it was finished, and why a movie like American Beauty, which I produced, would not compel me to direct it when Sam Mendes did a brilliant job directing it. And I don't know what the reason is. I think maybe some movies are destined to be yours, to belong to you, and some movies aren't. And my wife read American Beauty. I brought it home one night, and she said, "This is your next picture. You must direct it. This is one of the greatest scripts I have ever read, including some of the last few movies you've directed." and it didn't speak to me that way. I knew it was a good picture, but it just didn't speak to me, or didn't speak to that part of me that needs to make that critical decision to take over the whole project. And I went and hired a complete unknown to direct it. Sam Mendes had only done stage work, had never made a movie before, but I loved his theater work so much, I thought he could do an extraordinary job, and he did. And he won the Academy Award.
Emotion is a great factor in the films that we make here in India. Mm-hmm. And are you aware of any of our work?
I'm not as aware as I should be sitting up here, being somebody with international claim. We don't have great access to Indian films in America. We don't have, like they do in other countries, you go to any country in Europe or Asia, and you go to a hotel, and there are channels, and each channel is based on a country.
Right.
And there's movies, and there's news, and there's culture, and there's commentary from each of the different countries. We don't have that in the U.S.
Why?
Commercial reasons. If something is not deemed to be commercial or to make a connection with a demographic or a certain demographic, it's not considered to be worth putting on the air.
What do you think we should be doing for a greater exposure in, say, the United States of America?
I don't think it's anything that you need to do. It's something we need to do. We need to do this for the global culture, not just because I'm here in India talking to wonderful filmmakers, and certainly to yourself, who we all are aware of in America. But it's because, the world has shrunk to the size of a postage stamp because of the social networking. And just because of the breakthrough of the information highway, the oceans have narrowed and countries have come closer together, and cultures aren't so different when we can all share each other's art. And when that starts to happen, it's really up to the host country to find ways of streaming the art and culture and the great ideas and the great inspiration from a country like India. So that's not really your responsibility. It's our neglect and our need to be more responsible to exposing Americans to more films from around the world.
As somebody who is so influential in Hollywood and in America, would you propagate our case for us, please? Because we do need a lot more exposure.
I have propagated your case, and I will propagate the case. And part of the relationship, the fringe benefit of this great relationship that DreamWorks is having with Reliance and Anil Ambani and Amitabh Bachchan is the fact that this is one of our goals. One of our goals is to build the cultural bridge between India and the United States.
Right, right.
We're already building the bridge right now.
Mr. Spielberg, you have often said in some of your interviews that if you want to be remembered by some of your films, it would be E.T. and Schindler's List. Why?
Well, E.T. is the movie that when I go to different places, people talk about the most. You know, and it used to be just young people talk to me about Schindler's List, but that young demographic has really grown up, and now they're talking to me about showing Schindler's List to their children. Mm-hmm. And I'm getting so old, grandparents are telling me stories about their grandkids seeing not Schindler's List, but E.T. for the first time. So that's the film that people talk about the most when I travel. Mm-hmm. And the other film that people talk about the most when I travel around is Schindler's List.
Right. Is that just that reason, or was there something else behind?
Well, E.T. was the film that got me to want to be a dad for the first time. Mm-hmm. I was a bachelor, and I had no children, and I worked with Drew Barrymore and Robert McNaughton and Henry Thomas, who played Gertie and, you know, and the three kids. And by the end of E.T., I did not want to leave those kids with their parents. I just wanted to take those kids home with me and raise them. And I just simply realized that the entire E.T. was about my own search for, I guess, the parent in me. It was a healing movie because my mom and dad got divorced, and essentially E.T. is about an American family and a divorce and its impact on children. And I was working on a script about an American divorce when I got the idea to do the alien being stranded on Earth, and I combined both concepts. So in a sense, that movie was, at that time in 1982, the most personal thing I had ever done, and it led 3 years later to my having my first child.
Right. You have many children now.
I have seven now, and 3 grandchildren.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do they see your films?
They do. They don't like all of them. Because there's a we used to joke about this when I was growing up. In the 60s, we used to scream at anybody over 30 years old. There was a generation gap, and you don't understand us. And my kids are now throwing that right back at me.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because they tell you the truth. They really tell me the truth.
Which are the ones that they like the best?
I think the movie that my kids like, it depends because they like different movies at different times as they grow up. But the movie that they always talk about is E.T. I just have to say that's the one that, and Indiana Jones, the entire series, they like that the best, except they don't like the last one I made so much.
You've been making films at a time when there have been many contemporaries of yours, Coppola,
George Lucas, Scorsese,
Brian Palmer.
Right, Martin Scorsese.
Scorsese. Did you ever build relationships with them to discuss the future of cinema or what you were doing? Mm-hmm. Or was there envy in what the other person was doing?
Yes, there's always envy. Envy is a good thing. You can't rise to any great height without not just envy, but it's because envy might be the wrong word. It's more jealousy and ambition and wanting to do better than those guys. And they all felt that way. We all felt that way about each other. But in trying to inspire each other and outdo each other, we worked together and collaborated with each other.
Would you have done a Star Wars?
No. I would never have done them because my space movies are about, I don't want to go all the way out there to find aliens. I want them to come to Earth. It's much more convenient. I want them landing in my backyard. I don't want to have to lift a finger. You know, George likes to go, millions of light years out there. He loves that. He loves, what is that, far, far away, the galaxy far, far away. So that wouldn't have been in my wheelhouse. And arguably, but for me, one of the greatest movies ever made in the history of cinema is the first Godfather. Mm-hmm. Nobody could have done Godfather 1 and 2 like Francis. No one. Yeah. Marty, George, all the original group that grew up together, none of us could have done that the way Francis did.